Hi there, it's Matt here, and welcome back to the show, and welcome back to another of the guest episodes. My guest today is the fantastic Aric Prather. Aric, a PhD, wonderful guy. He is a leading expert in sleep science and behavioral health. He is serving as professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at the University of California, San Francisco, just across the bay from me here at the University of California, Berkeley. He is the director of the UCSF Center for Health and Community, and he co-directs the UCSF Aging, Metabolism, and Emotion Center. His research, in my mind, it's significantly advanced our understanding of how sleep impacts physical health, immunity, as well as emotional well-being, meaning that he's just one of those people who has plurality. He just seems to be able to annoyingly do everything. Aric's work is frequently featured in high-impact journals and media outlets like the New York Times and NPR. His fantastic new book, The Sleep Prescription, 7 Days to Unlocking Your Best Rest. You absolutely need to go out and check it out. It's a wonderfully informative, elegantly written in terms of digestible bite-sized chunks, 7-day guide, and not just 7-day guide, but from morning to evening on each one of those days guide. He has just an exceptional ability to translate complex science into actionable strategies. It's not just that you understand the science, you understand what to do with it. And I think his insights have really reshaped how we view and manage sleep health in both clinical and everyday settings. So without further ado, Aric, welcome to the show. And I'll first ask you, maybe just give some background in addition to that. And don't be shy, don't be modest, as to what you do, but also just how did you get into sleep science?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I was really kind of lucky. I know a lot of people that are in the scientific arena, but maybe it's true everywhere. It feels like I kind of fell into this, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to do this work in sleep. I did my PhD at the University of Pittsburgh that has a kind of a really big, well-renowned sleep and circadian science program. And so I kind of soaked up some of that stuff. A mentor of mine, Martika Hall, actually was a big proponent of sleep and how it's related to health. And so I was really fortunate as part of my training to begin to integrate measures of sleep into the work that we were already doing in the field of psychoneuroimmunology, and which is kind of the study of the behavioral and psychological and biological factors that drive immune function. And then as a clinical psychologist, you have to do a 1-year internship where you just kind of see patients and get that kind of training. I did that at Duke University Medical Center. And I got to learn from one of the pioneers in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, Jack Ettinger, and his colleague, Andrew Crystal. It was there that I really got this opportunity to see, gosh, sleep is just an incredible leverage point for improving health. I had done research in the past, but really didn't understand how powerful giving someone sleep back has on that individual and really how they interact with their families and their community. And sleep really is some of the secret sauce in making that happen. And then I was lucky enough to go to UCSF and be able to set up my own research program and been able to work with tons of really smart folks and do work spanning in laboratory work, trying to understand what happens when people don't get sleep and how that changes their emotions and how they deal with stress, but also testing some interventions to try to improve sleep and how that might have downstream effects on their biology. I also have the great fortune of helping run a insomnia clinic in San Francisco, getting to see the research translate into practice and how I can get an opportunity to get people's sleep back on track. And that's been incredibly meaningful for me.
And I think that makes all the difference. I know that we were speaking just before we started recording about how it feels to be on the front lines, boots in the trenches. It's one thing to do in the hallowed halls of academe, to do one's research and publish. And if you're like me, in terms of your papers, maybe it gets read by probably about maybe 3-4 people. But it's a very different thing to then be at the forefront and see patients, see what they're struggling with. Doesn't it just bring your sense back down to earth in terms of what it means not to sleep as a human being?
Absolutely. And I mean, I also think it helps shape my thinking around the high impact research questions. People come into the clinic and they really want to know, and they're really worried about what is going to happen if I don't get sleep, concerns about neurodegenerative disease, susceptibility to infectious illness. What is driving that? It's been this nice back and forth, use this research to help educate and kind of move the field forward, but also, as you said, kind of remain grounded in understanding that we can talk about sleep health at the population level. We can talk about innovative interventions, but at the end of the day, there's a person sitting in front of you, or
Yeah.
me now on Zoom, but but
Yep.
nevertheless, really is searching for something, and the opportunity to be able to impart these skills. I'm eternally grateful for this opportunity.
Well, they are, I'm sure, of your help too. In the book, it's this wonderful journey, Aric, where you take people through this sort of 7-day approach. And it's not just day, it's also night. It's night and day. It's how to think about your day in a structured manner, literally across the day, to set yourself up for the sleeping night, and then what to do at night to get the most energized day. Day one is very interesting. It's all about setting your clock, and not necessarily the one on your wall. It's the one inside of you, your internal clock. What I found interesting is that we often will focus on, I really need to get to bed at a certain time. I've been struggling with sleep, or I really need to get to bed early. It's all about the to bed component. You take a slightly different emphasis approach, which is about wake up time rather than to bed time. And more specifically, why waking up at a consistent time fills a balloon. Help us understand what on earth the balloon reference is there from me, Matt Walker, and why wake up time is perhaps the most important when you're trying to reset things, reset the table of good sleep at night.
Definitely. I mean, when I talk to people about sleep, it's often they want to know kind of like, what is the one thing that I can do? And of course, there's a whole list of things that people can do. But honestly, I think if there was one place to start, and that's why this book starts this way, is about getting up at the same time 7 days a week. And, before people start complaining about what about the weekends, all that kind of stuff, it is just so critical, because what it does is it anchors the two primary regulatory processes of our sleep. So the first one being our circadian rhythm. Getting up at the same time each day helps anchor our circadian rhythm, kind of that internal clock, that ebb and flow. Ideally, people can get some sunlight in their eyes to help shut down the production of melatonin. But the other reason that a stable wake up time is so important is that it sets the beginning of the accumulation within your homeostatic sleep drive, or what I think of as a balloon. So you kind of wake up in the morning, you've had a night of sleep, and your balloon is flat. And then you go throughout the day and it fills up with sleepiness, kind of that balloon blowing up as you use energy and you're just awake throughout that time. And by the end of the day, it gets really, really big. You begin to feel those sleepiness cues because your balloon is so big, and then you go to sleep and drain out that sleepiness. And by keeping a stable wake up time, your balloon starts filling up around the same time each day. Our days are similar from day to day in general. And so that just is just a really important fundamental thing to make more predictability for someone's bedtime. And this is mentioning the fact that I don't focus on people's bedtime. And I hear it all the time that people come in and they say, oh, I talked to another sleep medicine person and they said I should have the same bedtime each night. And in truth, if you get up at the same time each morning, you'll probably get sleepy around the same time each night. But for someone that has sleep problems, being prescribed a bedtime can actually be really anxiety provoking. You're waiting there, you're looking at the clock, the doc said go to bed at 11, 10:45, you're not feeling sleepy, and then it's just tick, 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 tick. And as you get closer to that bedtime, that anxiety can spiral out because you're not feeling sleepy. And then guess what? It's really hard to fall asleep. So in fact, rather than a prescribed bedtime, usually when we're kind of trying to fit someone's schedule, we have a bedtime that's no earlier than this bedtime. So if it's 11 o'clock, we say no earlier than 11 o'clock. And at 11 o'clock, if you're not sleepy, don't get in bed. And we'll talk more about why that is later on. But really focusing on the wake up time is just fundamental. And it's something that you can control. Sleep is something that I always say that no one ever thinks about how it works until it stops, and then we become
Yeah.
really focused on it. Sleep isn't something that you make happen. Sleep is something that happens to you. And having this prescribed bedtime, this pressure actually tends to push that sleep away. But you can control when you wake up. And that can set in time all of these subsequent things that happen throughout the day to kind of build up that balloon and allow you to get to sleep.
And in some ways, that's why the idea of saying, I fell asleep so late last night, I don't have those morning meetings, and I'm struggling with insomnia. I am so underslept, I'm going to sleep in, because at least once I'm asleep, shouldn't I just take everything that I can and sleep as late into the morning as possible? And in some ways, all you're doing there is kicking the can down the road, because it's a self-perpetuating issue. By waking up later that following day after a bad night of sleep, you then don't have enough time to build up enough sleep pressure in the inflated balloon. So not enough is weighing down on your shoulders. And then the second night becomes more challenging because of the absence of enough sleep pressure. And then you decide, well, I can't fall asleep. So you fall asleep even later because it takes you longer to develop all of that sleep pressure. And now you're wanting to wake up even later. So the way to shortcut that in some ways too is to say, I've had a bad night of sleep. It's not the end of the world. The best thing I can do, hard as it's going to be, much as I don't want to do it because I fell asleep at 3 a.m. rather than 11 p.m., doesn't matter. Get through that day, and the next night is usually going to be a much better night as long as you wake up at the same time.
That's exactly right. Because if that happens in that scenario, right, you'll wake up and your balloon will already be sort of filled up. Just you didn't get enough sleep. And so it will build up and build up. I mean, the day will be challenging. There are things maybe that we have to consider to like get through the day. But it's true that by the time your bedtime rolls around, and again, we don't want to go to bed prematurely early, but the balloon will be very large and you'll really feel those sleepy cues, and your night will probably be more restorative and a better night of sleep overall. So that's exactly the strategy.
Which then in some ways brings us on quite poignantly to day two. And day two, in some ways, is about easing off the gas, specifically stress management. And we certainly see it in a lot of people who come here to the sleep center. It's almost a notion of tired but wired. And by the way, I think Michael Grander's made the point, if you want to know the difference between being tired and being sleepy, just speak to an insomnia patient. They are desperately, desperately tired, but they just can't seem to get sleepy.
That's right.
And we often conflate those two. And I think one of the wedges that gets placed between tiredness and the healthy sleepiness mechanisms that lead us off into this wonderful journey at night of robust and resplendent sleep is stress and anxiety. You are one of the world's experts in this area. How do stress and anxiety affect sleep? And what strategies here, more specifically, do you recommend to manage those things effectively? I think that's what we, of course, understand, that when we're stressed, we don't sleep well. When we don't sleep well, bidirectionally, we get stressed. But also, how do we manage that? We don't hear conversation about that latter part very much either.
Yeah. And Michael Grander is absolutely right. I will say in our clinic too, as part of the evaluation, when people come in, I always ask about napping. And probably 95% of people say, no, there's no way I could nap. I try, but I can't possibly fall asleep. And it really is this kind of activation that people have in their brain that just does not allow them to drop off. And that's really challenging because people do feel like they're really missing that sleep, and they are. And you're right, stress and anxiety play an important role in keeping us from getting the sleep that we need. We have activation of our stress systems, and we have cortical arousal in our brain that makes it hard to turn off. A
And when
lot
we speak about that cortical arousal, we're not talking about arousal in the sense of some bedroom intimacy. We're really talking about your cortical arousal in this scientific sense means that your brain is just highly activated. It's almost sort of overactivated where you're just wide-eyed and you are highly alert. Is that cortical activation?
Yeah, that's right.
Cortical
That's right.
arousal, yeah.
I thank you for clarifying. Right. So it's this tired but wired. Your brain is wired and active, and for reasons that we'll probably talk about a little bit later, some of that is just conditioned. It's like all these bad nights of sleep and your brain just kind of gets really activated. I mean, one of the most common things that people tell me when they have insomnia is like, I was feeling really sleepy. I got in bed and my brain woke up. Right. And it's just like this feeling of activation, and it makes it really hard to sleep.
Is it almost as though you've learned the fact that you can be tired and you can be sleepy? And you can almost say, look, I fell asleep on the couch watching television, and then I get into bed and I'm wide awake and I don't know why. It's
Mhm.
because the context of this thing called the bedroom has been the battleground where you've always lost. And you've lost because you seem to be consistently awake when you want to be asleep. So no wonder after a while you go in there and you just think, wow, my brain says I'm an incredibly associative device. And I've learned that this thing called my bed is the place where actually I'm wide awake. You fall prey to that learned context association.
Yeah, it's classical conditioning.
It's
And
very real. You really do see this in the clinic.
oh my gosh, this is where I have like so much compassion for this problem because it seems ridiculous that this is happening to someone. They're like, I'm trying to go to bed, I'm trying to do these things, but there are so many things in our environment that tell our body what's happening next. I always use the example that, like, when I come home from work, I touch the doorknob to my home and I immediately get hungry because every day I come home and I like have a snack and now my body knows. It starts getting, okay, what are we gonna have now? Gonna make that insulin, gonna get you ready to metabolize whatever tasty snack you're about to have. And it's the same thing. I mean, there's so many things because our brains are just predicting machines, right? They're just trying to take in information, to use our metabolic resources to keep us alive and help us thrive. And these sorts of things in the environment help our brains know what to do next. And that works really well at bedtime for people who aren't sleeping poorly, right? They feel
Right.
sleepy, but they
You
get
have
in
the
bed.
opposite experience where you think, oh, great. The covers are over me, lights are out, pillow is there. It's almost the fantastic tour guide that is holding your hand and leading you easily with alacrity into sleep. Not so for the insomnia patient, it seems, though.
Right. It's the opposite. It's like someone at the gate saying, nope, we're full. You can't come in. No place on the sleep train. The question about stress contributes to that, right? Like, it helps activate us, but I think there are opportunities to try to get that under control. And this is challenging, that like trying to figure out how to add some of this stress management into your day. It's extra time, but it's investing, right? Like, it's a way to try to turn down the volume so that by the end of the day, it's not built up to a point that it actually gets in the way of your ability to sleep.
If someone said, give me just your top three anxiety stress management tools that you typically dispense in clinic, what would those look like?
One of the most important ones, if possible, is to really break up the day with micro breaks, right? So, actually giving you an opportunity, making it part of your plan to actually have time for yourself. Maybe it's like, go take a walk outside. Maybe it's just walk down the hallway and know that this is something for you to help manage the buildup of stress throughout the day, is really effective in helping people have a little bit more autonomy. So we know that stress and the harms of stress is when demands outweigh the control. And this provides a little bit more control, a little bit more opportunity to kind of decompress as the day progresses. But then,
Okay.
of course, there's techniques, right? There are deep breathing techniques. We certainly do progressive muscle relaxation is one of the tools in our toolbox to help people experience tensing and releasing of different muscle groups as they also do deep breathing. And you can do this during the day. You can do this in the evening as you wind down. Usually people have had some experience with that. And so I often recommend free apps that are available or ones that they might be able to get through their health service. Like,
Any that you would want to mention that you like? Obviously, no affiliation, or maybe
yeah,
you have an
no
affiliation. Please
affiliation. I
tell
mean,
us.
I will say in both cases, like, I've helped them with their sleep content,
Absolutely, yeah.
but they also just have a lot of content. Because I think one of the challenges is finding one that fits for you. Some people may hate my voice, but love yours. And I mean, who doesn't love your voice?
Majority who have reactive vomiting to my enunciation, but please go on.
Things like Headspace or Calm, they just have just a lot of content. And so finding some of these meditations that might work for people that can get them to wind down can be really helpful. But in some ways, it's about the experience that you're trying to produce. So for some people, it's like hobbies that they really enjoy. One of the things that can be really helpful in a wind down are doing things that are slightly positive but low arousal, doing something for yourself that you enjoy, but is not so activating. Like, maybe you love aerobic running, but this isn't what you want to do before bedtime. But maybe you're really into art, or you're really into reading, or you're really into things that help you get into that place that allow you to let go of the things that are happening in our lives. Those techniques can be helpful for stress. There are other techniques that we'll talk about as we go down the list with respect to worries that can really get in the way. But all of these things, just kind of enhancing your relaxation regimen, can be really helpful in helping people get in the space for a good night's sleep.
A long-standing partner of today's podcast is Element, spelled L-M-N-T. Element is a sugar-free electrolyte drink mix, and for me, it was the sugar-free part that made me start using it a while back. I buy my own supply just to stay objective, and beyond having electrolytes in the right balance, the other reason I'm a fan of Element is that it's scientific. If you look up the people who created the company, you'll find some pretty heavy-hitting physiology, biochemistry, and pharmacology expertise that's baked into the product. And again, all of that comes without any sugar. I also wanted to share that Element's newest limited time flavor, lemonade salt, is squeezing onto the scene Tuesday, May 20th. Anyway, I should note that this is a limited time flavor, so if you like the sound of lemon-flavored electrolyte goodness, grab some now. Happily, I badgered them, and they have agreed to give you fine folks a free 8-count sample pack with any purchase of Element if you use the link lmnt.com/MATTWALKER. So for free product with your purchase, just visit lmnt.com/MattWalker, and as I said, you'll get some free product. So then let's shift to day 3, which is in some ways not about the throttling down and the gradual descent onto terra firma of good sleep at night through relaxation, but is about how to be energized and doing energization. Great word, Matt. Doing it right. Some people will think about naps as a restorative tool for getting energized during the day. Others will think about strategic use of caffeine, which also we can think about both of these in the context of not only how it affects your day, but it may have manifold consequences on your night. How do we energize? How do we sort of energize ourselves and do it in the right way, perhaps regarding things like napping or caffeine or anything else you think is relevant here?
There are these things that are so common in the population to increase energy, but also can potentially mess around with our sleep. I always try to be thoughtful about this because I'm not the fun police. If you have bad sleep and you're trying to improve it, then these are things that you can probably implement. But things like napping is a good example. Napping can be really effective in certain instances. Like, say, for instance, people who have shift work, scheduled napping is really important to help them get through the evening, or people where it's been shown to boost alertness. And if you know that you're going to take a nap, it's going to steal some of that sleepiness out of that balloon. It's kind of like snacking before dinner. But if you know that, then maybe don't go to bed as early. Be part of the expectations and it won't spiral into insomnia. But in general, if you're trying to push all your sleepiness into the evening and bedtime, taking a nap to kind of boost that energy is not ideal. It makes it more challenging. Caffeine, in the same way, is a stimulant. It gets in the way of that adenosine that's building up in your brain, that chemical that drives kind of the experience of sleepiness and the homeostatic sleep drive that we talked about. Caffeine competes with that. It keeps you alert, but it also has an incredibly long half-life. I mean, as you've talked about on this show before, if you consume a double espresso at 4 p.m., you basically have a single espresso still in your system at 10 p.m. And of course, that can get in the way of your ability to sleep. And so what are the things that you can do instead of that? What are at our disposal? And I think one of the challenges in when people need to get their sleep on track and they implement this program is that it's going to be challenging in the beginning, right? You are going to have to carry forward that sleepiness throughout the day and into the night so that we can better consolidate your sleep. But there are ways to energize yourself a little bit better. And one of them is really simple. It's being more physically active. Instead of taking that nap after lunch where you really feel that circadian dip and that sleepiness, actually going on kind of a brisk walk can be incredibly activating and can get you over the hump so that you can get out there and do the things you need to do. Other things that increase your arousal, changes in temperature, particularly cold temperature, has been shown to be alerting. So maybe some cold water splashed on your face. I mean, these are kind of like simple things that are intuitive, but when we're trying to solve this problem, it is something that's actionable to get yourself to the evening where you've kind of built up this big sleepiness so that you can sleep well. And if you're sleeping well, it's not something that will actually get in the way of the next night.
And so, with the notion of napping and caffeine modulation and alternatives to all of that, perhaps I can come back, really moving on to day 4 in some ways, which is the notion of anxiety. None of us can be immune to the ravages of a stressful adult life. We can speak about the ideal world. None of us live in it. We all live in this thing called the real world where there is stress and anxiety. What was interesting about the book is that you spoke about the notion of when to worry and how to schedule worrying. Can you help me understand this notion of cognitive restructuring and worry scheduling? How does all of that work and where did this come from? And why is it important for sleep?
Yeah, yeah. So one of the pillars of insomnia is a lot of catastrophizing about what it means to not get a good night's sleep, what it'll mean for tomorrow. And a lot of this feels a lot bigger than it is in reality. People put a lot of pressure on themselves and a lot of worry about their sleep. And so one of the things that is helpful is to really begin to examine the evidence about how true is it that, if you don't get a good night's sleep tonight, you're going to lose your job tomorrow. And honestly, it gets to that point where we try to understand like what it is that you're really worried about and how you're going to feel on a poor night's sleep. And it's really about building resilience and showing this counter evidence that like, look, oftentimes you maybe have a bad night's sleep and you get through and no one notices and you just get through the day. You are resilient to this. Or you get a good night's sleep and guess what? You just don't feel great because it turns out that sleep isn't the end all be all of like what makes a day successful. But when you have insomnia, it sure feels like it. And so in our clinic, and also mentioned somewhat in this book, is about how we might be able to challenge this thinking around sleep. But then there's this worry, right? I mean, we have worries, lots of things that are even unrelated to sleep that can really get into our nights. Again, getting back to this idea, like people get in bed and their brain wakes up. And you know what? When their brain wakes up, it's not populated with like really positive thinking, right? People aren't like, oh, I'm so excited about tomorrow. Can't sleep now. Maybe that happens once in a while, but it's mostly this negative thinking. It's worry about tomorrow, worried about other things in your lives, maybe a little bit of rumination about things that happened in the past that they wish went differently. And all of this takes up brain space at a time where it's not when this should be happening. It's unfortunately in the time where you should be sleeping. And what do you do with that? And so one of the tools that has been shown to be effective is actually making it part of your schedule. So scheduling time in the day to actually do that worrying so that it takes some of the power out of it at night. The way that this works is that people will pick 10 minutes in the day, maybe 20 minutes, maybe 5 minutes, depending on like what's available, put it in their planner. And then at that time on that day, they actually start worrying. And it seems kind of silly, right? Like, oh my gosh, I can't imagine making myself worry, but it's actually really powerful. You can do it thinking it. It actually works better if you are writing it out, right? Because then you can kind of see it out in front of you. The important part is you use all the time. So if you feel like I don't have anything to worry about, no, you focus on it. You worry about something. You just get it out there. And there's something about kind of like getting it off of your brain and onto something that makes it a little bit easier to manage. But also, when the time's up, you stop and you say, okay, I've done the worrying. And then when you go to bed at night, you say, okay, I've already worried about this today. And importantly, I have it in my schedule for tomorrow. So I can kind of let it go and deal with it tomorrow. And it helps compartmentalize this very natural experience. And it provides you with a little bit more control. Because honestly, when people are worrying, it feels out of control. It feels like something's happening to you. And this tool helps provide some parameters so that it becomes more manageable and doesn't leak into someone's sleep time.
I love what you were saying there because so often in society, we're constantly on reception. And what you were saying is that perhaps one of the only times now that we do reflection is when our head is placed on the pillow. And you could well imagine that is the worst time to start reflection because to me, it's about that notion of rumination, and rumination leads to catastrophization. And catastrophization means that you're really going to have a harder time either instigating sleep or if you've woken up, getting back to sleep. And to me, also, and I don't know if you hear this in the clinic, everything seems twice as bad in the dark of night than it does in the light of day. And so, if you are going to spend some time just getting into some of the problems, maybe having a little rumination time, do it when it's daylight, there's people around, and you don't feel that terrible ensconced darkness that only weighs it down even more so. I think it's a great idea. I really liked it in the book. A partner and sponsor of today's podcast is Shopify. Let me share the link right away. Shopify.com/Matt Walker. As someone who spends his days researching sleep, the idea of selling merch felt, well, rather daunting. But I kept getting asked if I had t-shirts or gear. So I finally said, okay, Matt, get your act together and give it a try. And we have them coming. But the big question was, how on earth was someone like me, a scientist, going to get these items into your hands? Everyone said the same thing, use Shopify. It turns out, even me, an analog man in a digital world, was able to do it without any learning curve. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world and 10% of all e-commerce in the US. From household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. With hundreds of ready-to-use templates, you can build a really impressive online store that matches your brand style. Oh, and if you need artificial intelligence-powered help writing product descriptions or touching up images, Shopify's got that too. All of which is to say that if you're ready to sell, just try Shopify. So if you are interested, turn your business idea into reality with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/Matt Walker. Once more, that's shopify.com/Matt Walker. Speaking of when to disengage and when to engage in things, engage in stress and worry at certain times during the day, but maybe disengage from other things, let's come on to technology. The invasion of technology into the bedroom and into our lives. We're not computers, as well you note in the book, but I do think that we forget as children, parents typically give us a wind down routine, whether it's a bath, whether it's a sleep story. There is some kind of procedure that we go through that gradually brings us down, sort of like trying to land a plane. We're gradually descending and we go through that. And once a parent has figured that out, my goodness, do you stick to it? We forget then as adults that we also need some kind of a wind down routine. How do you think about wind down routines for your prescription, as it were, to your patients in the clinic and for this book? And how does that relate to screen time and electronics?
Yeah, I think this is a really important point. And I mean, I think my perspective maybe isn't the same as everyone's, but I do think it becomes like a real challenge in getting people to wind down. And as you mentioned, with adults, it's not so different in that kind of the routines need to stay consistent. I think of this as more like rituals that people have
Yeah.
that cue the body that this is part of the transition. And what those things are usually fall into the same sort of bins around maybe it's taking a warm shower that we know can be helpful, or watching some light television, talking with loved ones, reading, things that are, again, this slightly positive, low arousal things, But the more you do them consistently and pair it with sleep, the more ingrained they become, these rituals, and your body begins to expect them. And I think that can be really powerful. And so focusing on those things, but it's always a challenge in finding what those things are for an individual, because sleep is universal, but it's also personal. Like there are things that are going to work for some individuals that not for others, right? So I always think about how, when I first got started doing this, I was like, oh, well, reading, that's the thing that's going to work. Cause like for me, it's like 2 pages and I'm like, I can barely get the book off my chest to fall asleep, right? But then I had these patients that were kind of like super bookworms, and they would like devour books. They come in the next week and I'd be like, oh, well, how's your sleeping? They're like, well, I'm not sleeping at all, but you won't believe how many books I got through this week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like I didn't even consider that as a thing. So, it's really about creating routines that produce that feeling of relaxation for the individual. But then that raises this question about electronics and concerns about light exposure and all of these sorts of things. And I know you've discussed this quite a bit recently in some of your other podcasts. And I do certainly tell people like, well, if you're going to be staring at a screen, like maybe put a filter on. But honestly, I think it's so much more about the content that's being consumed that can really make it difficult for people to let go and to transition to that sleep bedtime. So things that are like highly rewarding and keep you coming back. I mean, the whole internet is created to keep people engaged. And so it's something that we need to be mindful of, that can be a slippery slope and actually end up keeping people from making that transition. And so it's really about being thoughtful about the types of content that people might see on a screen prior to bedtime. My example is like, I always suggest to people, why don't you watch TV, but don't do it in bed, right? We always say that like the bed is for, say, sleep and sex. Do it out of the bedroom. Watch things that you've seen before, that you're not like waiting for the next episode to see what happens, right? Like this is not the time to start binge watching some kind of suspenseful Netflix series. For me, like The Office, The American Office. I've seen it so many times. It's just relaxing. I don't need to know what happens. I know what happens. And it's just part of this calming but engaging content that allows me to wind down. So in general, we tell people to disconnect from work. So like not checking emails, say an hour or so before bedtime, not doing things that are going to increase that cognitive arousal that you mentioned, again, just kind of your brain getting really active, and do things that engage this rest system, this relaxation system, your parasympathetic nervous system, that can help you wind down so that you have this nice transition to bed. And again, the more you make these routines and rituals more consistent, the easier it'll be over time. And your body will fall in line because there'll be much more predictability.
So, in terms of bringing your body back into line, we've also got to bring our mind back in line. And earlier we spoke about this notion of the battleground. And if you are suffering from insomnia, so often you'll walk into the bedroom and you just feel that sense of the bedroom being this place of almost an adversarial nature, because at that point, when you are suffering from insomnia, your sleep controls you and you don't control your sleep because you don't have the confidence. So, how do we start to try to move past that and break those associations? How do I retrain my brain? And how do I use controlling things that would normally activate me to better retrain my brain to be able to better sleep?
Yeah, I do see this conditioned arousal, this feeling of angst around bedtime and in the bedroom as just such an important opportunity for improvement for people that have insomnia. A lot of it is people are just, they don't know what happened. They're not thinking about anything. It's like a physiologic response that they're like, I felt sleepy. I'm like, what is happening? Why is this happening to me? It's like something's being done to you. And I think that can be really scary and distressing, but it's also something that can be opportunity for intervention and improvement. First, we want to make sure that the bedroom environment is as good as it can get, right? So you want to make sure that it's dark. You want to make sure that it's quiet. You want to make sure that it's a cooler temperature. And then, as you noted earlier, it's really important to feel safe. I apologize for not mentioning that before. Like, safety signaling of the bedroom is really critical. I mean, you think about kids and their stuffies, right? Those stuffies that they sleep with or carry with them are like safety signals in a lot of ways, and can be really helpful in helping your body know that it's in a safe spot. And so doing things to make sure your bedroom is a place where you can feel comfortable or imagine yourself feeling comfortable is really important. What do you do with this kind of angstiness that you feel as you get in bed or when you wake up in the middle of the night and can't get back to sleep? And so there's a technique called stimulus control therapy that was created by Dick Bootson, who's kind of a legendary figure in the behavioral sleep medicine field. And it's basically this idea that we want to take advantage of your homeostatic sleep drive that's built up, this balloon that's built up, and you don't want to get in bed until you feel sleepy. Do the wind down, get sleepy. And then when you get in bed, if you get in bed and you find that your brain wakes up and you're tossing and turning, you want to give yourself a chance to try to fall asleep, right? Like, you don't want to give up everything right away. But say 15, 20 minutes go by and you just can't sleep and it's just not feel like it's happening. You really need to get out of bed and go do something quiet until you begin to feel sleepy again. And then you try again. And basically what you're doing is you're trying to break the relationship between the angstiness that you're feeling and the bed. So you're moving that experience out of the bedroom, and then you're repairing that feeling of sleepiness with the bed. And you do the exact same thing in the middle of the night. You know, you get up, you use the bathroom, whatever, and then you get back in bed and you just like can't fall asleep. And like 20 minutes go by, 30 minutes go by. You're just like, I can't do that. You just don't want to spend that excess time tossing and turning in bed. You want to remove yourself from the situation until you feel sleepy, then get back in bed. And honestly, this is such a back and forth with patients to get them to do this. Because like, no one wants to do this. You want to be in bed. And you know that if you're not in bed, you're not going to fall asleep because you're out of bed. And that's true, except we know that you're tossing and turning. We're really trying to take advantage of the fact that your homeostatic sleep drive will continue to build because you're awake. It will increase the pressure for sleep. And we're all in the service of trying to recondition your body so that the bed is a place of sleep. In the beginning, it's often like this back and forth, like someone gets out of bed, they get sleepy, they get back in bed, and their brain wakes up, and then they have to get back out of bed. And I always tell people, like, if that happens, that's just evidence that this is a huge problem that we need to grapple with. But it's hard. It really does take some gumption and really getting involved in it. But over time, it will improve. And we can make the bedroom a place where it facilitates sleep instead of standing in the way of it.
A partner for today's episode is AG1. I've been using AG1 for quite some time now, and just for the record, I buy it myself to stay away from any of those trappings of free product. AG1 has just released the new formulation, which is AG1 Next Gen. It's still one scoop once a day, but now comes with many upgraded probiotics, plus additional vitamins and minerals. I also explored their 4 human clinical trials to prove out their efficacy, with the data showing a marked boost in healthy gut bacteria. And that's the thing. I appreciate how AG1 keeps adapting to new scientific findings. They have made many formula changes over the years, and each new iteration keeps it at the cutting edge of this space. As I've mentioned, I began my AG1 journey over 4 years ago. Any company that holds their scientific rigor to the flames of clinical trials means a lot to me. So subscribe today to try the next gen of AG1. If you use the following link, you'll also get a free bottle of AGD 3K2, as well as an AG1 welcome kit and 5 of the upgraded AG1 travel packs with your first order. So make sure to check out drinkag1.com/Matt Walker. That's drinkag1.com/Matt Walker. Speaking about methods for the facilitation of sleep, I think it brings us on nicely to day 7. And it's one of the things that I certainly know for myself, and when I've interacted with other people, is immensely powerful in the toolkit of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is staying up late. And we often think of staying up late as something that is the enemy of sleep. And for people who are good, healthy sleepers, often staying up late, binge watching, will constrain your sleep and make your quantity and quality of sleep perhaps worse. That's not true when it comes to people who are struggling with sleep rather than sleeping well. And it really comes on to this notion of time in bed restriction, or what I suppose sort of used to be known as sleep restriction therapy. Help us understand how this works and why it works, because it's so oxymoronic. As I said earlier, I come to you saying, I don't sleep well. I'm struggling with sleep. I don't get enough. And you tell me, excellent. I'm definitely going to make sure that you spend less time in bed. And I just think this person doesn't know what they're talking about. They're just being malicious. You're not. And it works. How does it work? Why does it work? And what is it?
Yeah, it is. It feels so ironic. People desperately want sleep, and then we're trying to move around their schedule to make the opportunity less. And I think it starts from the fact that when people are not sleeping well, they end up spending a lot of time in bed, not sleeping and tossing and turning and being anxious. And we track that information. We give everybody sleep diaries. We follow their sleep from night to night to see what that looks like. And lo and behold, people are spending a lot of time in bed, not sleeping. And so what we do is we keep their wake up time the same. We've already established this like consistent wake up time. And then we tend to try to push someone's bedtime close to match the amount of time that they're actually getting sleep, right? So if people are spending 9 hours in bed, but only getting 6 hours of sleep, we set their bedtime to match that so that they say get an opportunity of maybe 6.5 hours. And that feels really bad for people. Like they're really scared about this. They're like, I'm just having such a bad time. Like, how am I supposed to do this? But it really is capitalizing on this sleep drive, this balloon, right? We're basically making this balloon very, very, very big. And it's guided by someone's own sleep data. So it's not like we're taking away the amount of sleep that someone's getting. We're actually matching that. And people are going through the world this way, but we're just trying to constrain it, the opportunity. And when you build someone's sleep drive up that much, oftentimes their anxiety about their sleep pales in comparison to their need for getting to bed. Their body is like, I need to sleep. What happens are two things. That one, your sleep ends up being really consolidated. So it's probably shorter than you'd like, but it's in kind of one big chunk. And what we find is that that big bolus of sleep feels better subjectively to people than that same amount of sleep or even a little bit more sleep if it was broken up, right? This idea that if you got 7 hours of sleep, but you woke up every 30 minutes over that time, that wouldn't feel as good as kind of like putting it all in one chunk. And I think we all know what that feels like. And so by beginning to do that, people begin to feel better. Also, this fact that they end up falling asleep and staying asleep builds confidence, it builds self efficacy that they can do this. Their sleep system isn't broken. And in no instance have I ever had anyone in the clinic come in and me think, you know what? I think their sleep system is just broken. It's in there. And we just need to figure out a way to get it all consolidated. And often moving someone's bedtime later really gets us a lot of the way there. It does take some time for people to build up to it. And then what happens? I mean, just to be clear, we don't restrict people's time in bed indefinitely. Once someone's sleep becomes consolidated and they have a sleep efficiency, which is basically the amount of sleep that you're getting for the time opportunity, kind of a ratio, if that equals about 85%, we'll begin to slowly move someone's bedtime earlier, usually in 15-minute chunks, maybe 30 minutes, depending on how they're doing, until we begin to see any awakenings.
How would that work practically? I'm someone who normally goes to bed at 11 and I wake up at 7. And
Mhm.
for the past 2.5 months, I just can't get it together. I just cannot sleep more than probably 4.5, 5 hours of sleep. I then come in, and what does my bedtime restructuring actually look like? Are you going to constrain my sleep at the front end, at the back end, on both ends? How should I think about that? And
Yeah, absolutely.
to
So
how
yeah,
much? Yeah.
yeah, using that very specific example, right? If you were in the clinic and you were 11 to 7 sleeper, but you were only getting 5 hours on average, what we would do is you would still get up at 7 and then we would count 5 hours back. So till 2, and then add on, say, 30 minutes, 15 to 30 minutes for time, like wiggle room time of like falling asleep and things like that. So maybe your bedtime becomes 1:30. So now that's 5.5 hours of opportunity. So now you have to get up at 7 in the morning, go throughout your day using some of the strategies that we all talked about, taking breaks, doing the scheduled worry, all of these other things, and then waiting until that time, right? And that can be challenging, right? Like some people will be like really tired, and it's also extra time in your day that you never had before. And so what do you do with that time? You don't want to necessarily work longer at night or something like that, right? Like we need to, there is often a lot of trying to massage how people deal with this. And then they kind of keep themselves up until 1:30, and then with this huge balloon, and then get in bed. And hopefully that is a big enough a balloon that people drift off quickly. In some cases, their brain wakes up, and we have to do this kind of get out of bed and play around with that until it becomes more consistent. But over time, it will, in most cases, become more consolidated. And then once we have that and it looks good, we'll begin to kind of move people's bedtime a little bit earlier until they're getting more sleep. Now, in my experience, people often end up have a bedtime that's a little bit later than they thought it would be. And that's where we stick. But it's actually a really powerful tool because it leverages someone's biology, and it's something that people can implement on their own if their sleep starts to get off track again.
So we know that this isn't an immensely successful tool in the box, but one of the things I wanted to follow up on, and that I think many people don't hear about regarding this bedtime restriction, is what is my long-term outlook? Am I going to be constantly under the duress of a sleep restriction therapy program? How do you start to then think about backing it out once people get their sea legs underneath them, once their brain has been in some ways almost retrained, and they have now got their confidence to say, I thought I couldn't sleep and my brain was broken, but it's clearly not, and I've got my confidence back. What do you then do in terms of titrating back out an allowance of bedtime? And is this something that it's a one-shot deal that once people get those legs back underneath them, they're done? Should they always be mindful of this? Should they always be thinking, I should just keep a very tight rein on this no matter what? How do you think about the long term of bedtime restriction?
Yeah. There's questions about what do we do for time in bed restriction? And, as I was noting before, like once it's consolidated, we begin to move bedtimes earlier and earlier,
Right.
right? So usually in 15 or 30-minute chunks, maybe every few days or once a week
Okay,
until
so it's days and weeks when that expansion starts to happen, not you're under duress for a year and then we expand you back.
it's definitely weeks. And so in our clinic, we tend to see people maybe once a week or once every other week for like 6 times, maybe. I mean, it depends on the situation and all of those sorts of things, but we can often make headway in that time. But when people have had insomnia, it often can stick a little bit in the back of their head. People
Okay.
that have had kind of real significant insomnia are always at greater risk of having it again. But I think that's what these types of tools are really good at being built for, is getting ahead of it and implementing these things so that you can get things back on track more quickly. Like life happens, right? Like there are always stressors, and there's a reason why we're able to go without sleep. Ask any parent of a newborn. It is something that we're built to be able to do. But in cases when there's stress, it's really the challenge of like when the stress has remitted and our sleep continues to be affected, where we really want to buckle down and go back into the toolbox to get these things back on track. And it has been shown that relative to other treatments, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia
Very effective, isn't it?
is very effective in helping people over the long term in keeping their sustained improvements in their sleep.
And I suppose I should probably ask, and in some ways it's an unfair question because I'm obviously not a prescribing medical doctor, but are there some people for whom just this notion of saying, I go through a psychological program, I work with a clinician, cognitive behavioral therapy requires me to put effort in, where some people are just saying, no, no, I'm uninterested, just give me a pill. You must see that in the clinic. How do you think about that? What's the response to that? What do you do for those people?
Yeah, it's really challenging. I mean, I will say in our clinic, the majority of people are taking something, right? Because they don't know how to get to us. And I have so much compassion for primary care physicians that they just want to help the person in front of them, right? And
Yeah,
our wait lists are long. Everybody's wait list is long for any kind of mental health treatment. And so people end up taking different sorts of substances to try to sleep better. Some of them create physiologic dependence, but almost all of them create a psychological dependence. And, we
I
have to
see.
contend with that. In some instances, there are individuals that are just like, this pill works great. How do I just keep taking that? And that's usually a sign that, like, this particular behavioral treatment, which takes time, it takes quite a bit of effort, maybe not the solution for them right now. Maybe they're not in the
I
place
see.
to take that on. And that happens. I totally get that. But in the long term, I do think that these tools can be helpful and there is an opportunity to sleep without those substances. The other thing that I think is really interesting and maybe something that, you have some thoughts about, Matt, is one of the challenges that I often face in delivering this particular therapy is that the sleep that is natural does not always match up with what the experience is when people take medications.
Yes, very much so.
And so there is a little bit of acceptance that people have to have about what medication free sleep is like. And that can be challenging.
Yeah, and I think it just comes back to this idea of trying to help motivate people back towards the cognitive behavioral therapy approach, considering how much evidence there is and how we know it stacks up to sleeping pills. The notion being that I get it. I know that you don't want to go into this long, drawn out process. You just want a pill. But let me ask you this. Having had a bad month of sleep, if at the end of this month now you're seeing me here in the clinic, I were to be able to go back in a time machine and go back to the start of that month and say, I could help you reduce a vast number of the nights of poor sleep and challenging sleep that you've had over this past month. If all you do is just join me on this journey for a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, if I could now just wave that magic wand and eradicate all of that bad sleep over the past month, would you take the deal? And most people would probably say yes. Even after a really bad night of sleep, they'd say, look, can you just give me back a great night of sleep? I'd almost pay you anything to do that if you could just wave the wand this morning and take away all of last night. Is motivation a big part of this for cognitive behavioral therapy and keeping people engaged? And is that part of the regimen?
I think motivating, having a plan, I think is really important, like being very clear about what it looks like, what are the parameters, the rationale for it. It is challenging, but the goal is to get people to be okay with a bad night of sleep.
That's an interesting, yeah. So a very different way of saying it is don't stress. I know that you're desperate for sleep tonight, but one bad night of sleep, don't listen to that British guy. If you've heard of him, he's an absolute idiot. Nothing's going to be problematic in the short term, but we do need to be thoughtful about your long term. We do want you to sleep better. It's just taking the pressure, for goodness sake, take the pressure off people and just say, relax, it's okay. Let's just accept these bad nights of sleep for now. And we do have something that is more than likely to work for you in the future. It's a process. And all you have to do is just trust the process.
I think you've sat in some of our sessions, it sounds like. But, and I also think the other mantra that I think can be powerful in getting people to understand sleep biology is that no matter how bad your night is, using these tools, we know that the most likely outcome is that tomorrow night will be better.
Yeah. Isn't that the truth? Yeah. And then it's just about trying to string those good nights together and start to make the proportion of those good nights relative to bad nights increasingly greater.
I always focus on we're trying to improve your sleep on average.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
can never promise that tonight's going to be great because, like, life happens. Like, a car alarm could go off. Your kid could get up and have from a nightmare. Like, we don't know. But if you stick to these principles, on average, your sleep will improve. And that means on average, your daytime functioning will improve.
With the hopeful message there, I would love to firstly thank you. Thank you for just walking us through a week of better sleep. What I like about the book, and the reason I wanted to have you on the podcast, is it's actionable. It's a really easy book to read. There's nothing dense. There's no scientific highfalutin gobbledygook like some other authors who wrote a sleep book maybe fell prey to. And it's meaningful because you can start doing these things. You could start doing them tonight if you wanted to. So there is sleep salvation, I think, within this book that people who are struggling can really turn towards. Where can people turn towards you? Where can they find you? Where do you reside online?
I would love for people to connect with me, and if they're struggling, to help people find the resources they need. So, I'm on X at Aric Prather. I have a website, ericprather.com, but also, if you just Google search me on the internet at UCSF, that's also pretty easy too. I love talking about sleep and trying getting people to sleep better. I know we're all trying our best. Sometimes it just takes little changes here and there to reap the benefits of a good night's sleep.
Aric, you're an absolute gem. Thank you so much for being on the show. Folks, please go and follow this wonderful gentleman. He is a wealth mine of that information. There is course correction on the horizon if you read through the book. I promise you that. And with that, I will sign off. We will both wish you a resplendent night of sleep. And if you are looking for some sleep health, even just trying to optimize your sleep, I think there's a lot that you can get from the book. Aric, thank you once again.
Thank you.